Morning, everybody, and welcome to today's e-seminar hosted by Alsbridge. I'm Brady Lever. It's my pleasure to present this webinar to you today. Right now, I have everyone on mute. However, throughout the presentation, we'd like to invite your active participation. So we'll be monitoring questions as well as the chat box throughout the e-seminar. So if you have any questions, please put them in there, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. The session is being recorded. It will be made available to you tomorrow on sourcingleadership.com. You'll also get an email tomorrow morning with the link to the recording, as well as a PDF of the slides. Today we have the pleasure of having our Alsbridge Managing Directors, Chris Pattacini and Howard Davies. They'll be presenting today. So without any further ado, I'll present you to Howard.
Thanks, Brady. Hi, everybody. Wherever you happen to be, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. We're going to be taking you through a series of activities around pricing today. I have my colleague Chris, as Brady introduced, who I've been working with for many years now within Alsbridge and particularly around benchmarking and pricing. Both of us have a long track record in the pricing business, and hopefully we'll share some of that knowledge and, more importantly, data around what we're seeing in the market today. So if we can just move on, I'll talk a little bit about the topics we'll cover in the session today. A little bit about Alsbridge and ProBenchmark. Hopefully most of you are familiar with us as an organization, but I'll just make sure that we level set on that. We'll talk about a particular trend that is actually hitting the market a lot more from a practical point of view now as companies start to use automation and autonomics as part of their own operations. So we'll show what impact that's starting to have in pricing, and Chris will talk us through that. We'll also cover some other general market trends. As some of you may know, we run these sessions fairly regularly. So we'll talk not just about autonomics and RPA, but how we see pricing changing and how we have seen it changing over the last year, and how we see that happening over the next 12 months across the IT and the business process landscape. And then we'll just finish up with some conclusions from our analysis of the pricing for the different areas that we cover. As Brady said, if you have questions that occur to you as we go through the session, please type those in. I'll try to capture those and include those in our discussion as we go through the session. And if we don't have a chance to get to all of those, obviously we'll get back to people afterwards. So keep putting those questions in for us. Just a few words about Alsbridge. As I'm sure you know, we're a global advisory firm helping companies to realize and define their sourcing strategy. Benchmarking is a key part of that. Most of what we do has some degree of benchmarking as part of it, whether it's just determining the current prevailing price for a type of service, the likely benefits of sourcing, the impact of transformation on business functions. Benchmarking is a key part of that, and I hope you'll see that as we go through sharing the trends with you. Another big part of our organization is in the network practice, helping companies to make the best use of their network capabilities. That also applies in hardware and software areas, where companies use us to help understand and get better prices for their hardware and software portfolio right across the IT landscape. And the last part is a pretty fast-growing part of our business, which is in vendor management and governance services. This is really helping companies to procure and manage their vendor and supplier relationships from a contracting and a support and reporting point of view. So many different facets of the business that we do, and as you see on the right-hand side, we work in many different locations, many different sizes of projects, and have been awarded many IAOP recognitions over the last 6 or 7 years. So with that a little bit more, in terms of ProBenchmark, where we look at, just to give you a bit of a landscape of the activities we cover, on the left-hand side here you can see that the typical areas within the pricing analysis that we cover, looking at all of infrastructure. Cloud is obviously an emerging delivery model that we've got lots and lots of mature pricing data for now. We look at the typical end user support services, the data center operations. We cover managed print, network device management, and all of the telecom carrier services that fall underneath that. We look at all of the application development and maintenance services, whether they be labor-based or outcome-based in terms of activities. We also cover, as I mentioned, the hardware and software market prices. And at the bottom of the screen there, you see we cover some of the business functions. We do a lot of work around finance and accounting, HR and business contact centers, and starting to do more and more work on the industry verticals, looking at, again, what companies pay for services from third parties and how to price those for certain selected industries. And the last thing, just about ProBenchmark, for those that haven't been familiar with it, ProBenchmark is the tool set that we use. It's a real-time pricing tool that we use for all the benchmarking that we do and all the advisory work that we perform. It's, I think, still the only tool, as far as I'm aware, in the market that allows us to look at market prices for IT and business services. It's a real-time tool. We have many, many clients who subscribe to it directly, and all the data in the tool is all built from actual benchmarks we've done, actual client situations that we've advised on, and of course sourcing contracts. We benchmark somewhere around 800 to 900 contracts a year, and it's all of that data that we use with this analytical engine in ProBenchmark, which is a patented tool, by the way, that Chris and the team work with to bring that data to you in an easy way to understand. And hopefully we'll be sharing some of that with you and giving you a chance to ask more questions around that. So without further ado, let me pass over to Chris to start talking us through some of the findings of all of that data.
Great, thanks Howard, and good morning and afternoon or evening to folks. We're going to set the stage a little bit to talk about our IT pricing trends, really by taking a step back and looking at the manufacturing industry as a model for what we expect to happen in the marketplace, or what's actually happening in the marketplace. In the top half of this screen, you'll see an example of an assembly line, certainly turn of the prior century, where you see folks there working on the line, doing the work, if you will, to the evolution. Two things that have occurred here in the market. The first is that you'll notice on the upper right-hand corner that today it's most of that labor that you would typically expect to see has now been supplanted by robots doing the work. And that's not to say that the laborers haven't gone away. The second half of that change or evolution is that the jobs that people were doing are now different. So, gone are the days of the manual laborer, now replaced by individuals who manage, maintain, and build and program the robotics that actually do the manual labor. So while the labor has gone in one portion of the work, it's morphed and changed and now delivered in a different part of the work. And obviously that requires most of the routine skills are things that have gone away in favor of much more higher end skills, and certainly overall fewer resources in the solution, if you will. And we'll see that trend exist in the IT services and business process outsourcing services as well. And we're starting to just now see the beginning of that trend. The second half of that trend is not only the takeout of labor, but also the change in the product that's being delivered. So again, we have the what might be a Model T Ford, again back in the prior century, versus the I believe this is the BMW i8, which is the electric car that BMW is now offering. And you can imagine the reliability and capabilities that are available today that were not available in cars earlier. So not only have we been able to take labor out of solutions in the auto industry as an example, but we've also been able to create a much better product, and that same trend will occur, we believe, in the outsourcing market as it relates to IT services and business process services, and really through two related but separate trends. The first of those trends is robotic process automation. Both of these are related to automation, but the first, robotic process automation, is really around being able to have robots, virtual robots, if you will, do the things that people would do in a business process. So processing claims or invoices, back office functions where someone is using multiple screens and they're interacting with different systems. To the extent that those are very well-defined processes with rules that govern them, you can create, using some of the software solutions on the right-hand side that are shown there, build capabilities to actually have these virtual robots perform those functions. And those robots, as long as it's a very well-defined deterministic outcome, the robots will process the transactions. They'll do it 24/7. They'll do it a lot faster than people would be able to do it. But obviously those systems need to be developed and coded and integrated with the solution. So again, the type of individuals that make up the solution are much more higher end folks rather than the folks that are doing the day-to-day work. So you end up really creating a significant reduction in labor and then changing the mix of the labor, if you will. And so robotic process automation is used primarily for BPO services. Again, sort of replacing the accounts payable clerk or the claim processor or the person, anyone that's interacting with multiple computer systems and trying to process some business process. What's interesting about these systems is not only do they do the work, but they also know when they can't do the work, and then allow a human person to also be engaged in the process, and that person would act like a level 3 agent and figure out what actually, since the system couldn't process this, it must be an exception. What do I need to do as a human? What decisions do I need to make as a human, and how do I process it? And over time, the systems, we believe, will be able to learn those exceptions and then incorporate the exceptions into the rule-based processing. So that's robotic process automation. It's primarily related to business process services. And then the second type of automation we see, which is primarily focused on the IT infrastructure, sort of the back-end IT delivery of services, is Autonomics. And this is a similar method or process, if you will, where instead of virtual robots, you sort of have a virtual engineer that's making decisions on how to manage an event or resolve an issue or take a service desk call and really kind of manage the environment. Again, the goal to take labor out of the solution, make the response to addressing issues and problems and managing the environment much more repeatable and stable. And again, these systems will learn by applying the algorithms of the past practice on what has worked and what hasn't worked. The example I oftentimes give is a server that is every 3 weeks or so is crashes for some reason, and the system automatically reboots the server so that once it crashes, it knows it goes and reboots the server. But then it might learn over time that every 3 weeks this server has to be rebooted. So it could either do one of two things. It could reboot the server proactively so that there's no outage occurred, or report this as a trended issue that someone needs to go determine why this action needs to keep taking place every 3 weeks. And again, as part of that process, you've got level 3, real people interacting with the tool, helping the tool learn, how to deal with certain situations and the like. So we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the benefits for Autonomics, and we'll talk about the impact on IT services. As I mentioned earlier, the benefits for most companies, it reduces dependency on labor, and then also related to that is improving IT operations as well as compliance so you're always ensuring that activities that need to occur from a process standpoint are occurring because they're included in the process flow. From a provider standpoint, and this is sort of the tale of two cities, obviously providers that implement autonomic solutions will be able to reduce their delivery costs and thereby improve margins. And what's going to be interesting about this evolution is to see how the market absorbs the savings opportunity and how much of those savings will ultimately be passed on to customers. And we certainly expect, and we're seeing, significant price reductions on new bids that include Autonomics, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market through some examples. But it remains to be seen how the market will ultimately absorb this capability, because there is an investment that needs to be made on the front end, and so it'll be interesting to see how the market evolves. And obviously, from a provider standpoint, having improved service quality ensures that there's less risk in their solutions from a service compliance standpoint, and also being able to provision solutions better. And of course, any new solution doesn't come without risk. So that we've identified a few of the risks there. Certainly, resistance to change. Although, as we've seen, organizations that start to understand how they can absorb that risk, is really diminishing over time. And then also there's increased costs, sort of on a fixed cost basis or investment that's required up front. And again, we're seeing providers taking different approaches, but in many cases absorbing the upfront costs, if you will, to get providers to adopt these solutions. And the key there, we believe, is that this market will further allow providers to strengthen the relationship that they have with their customer, and really create a much more sticky relationship than what they have. As you can imagine, deployment of these kinds of capabilities inside of an IT solution, it requires time for the technology to, quote unquote, learn the environment and be able to improve the outcomes, reducing the labor and increasing the quality. And what remains to be seen is, once a provider has implemented an autonomic solution inside a customer's environment, it remains to be seen how easy it will be for a customer to move to another provider or another technology solution. So the jury's still out on that. We're going to be tracking that as at least these initial transactions start to create savings and benefits for customers. And then, what will happen 3 to 5 years from now when these transactions are up for renewal, and how sticky will those transactions be? And we believe they will be much more sticky than they are today, certainly. And then from a mitigation standpoint, I think the biggest that we see right now is starting with pilot programs. From a provider standpoint, that means identifying the right customer that's willing to take on this approach to reap the benefits of savings, but at the same time not having it be such a large marquee account that if things aren't working as planned, you're able to recover from that. And certainly for organizations that are looking at doing themselves, although we're not seeing a lot from a autonomic standpoint, being able to have a proof of concept, if you will, on one service or capability, I think is ultimately going to be a critical element of success. So as I mentioned earlier, these kinds of technology changes don't come without some sort of investment. But you can see on the left-hand side the chart where, and this is an example of a sort of level 1, level 2, level 3 support, how the total effort ultimately in each of those classes is reduced and replaced with automation. And on the right-hand side, there's obviously investment that's required to make that happen. So certainly the software license fees for the Autonomic solutions, and then deployment configuration costs related to those. And then there's the couple two areas there, knowledge transfer and training, I think, are ones that, again, going back to how the world needs to change and the type of work that's going to be done, we'll be replacing sort of manual labor on a service desk or level 2 agents, if you will, with higher end, higher value, more experienced individuals who will be interacting with the solution or the autonomic tool, helping solve much more complex problems so that the tool can then learn those, how to solve those problems, and then obviously configuring and setting up those tools. So the skill set's going to be much more different than what we see today in the marketplace. And then in the lower right-hand corner is the typical technology curve in terms of making an investment in the first year or so, followed by the savings. And we'll show some actual scenarios that we've captured with some services. What's interesting is that the actual upfront price is actually not that much different, and we believe that's because providers are trying to get these proof of concept solutions out into the market, show their success, so they can then turn around and use those as references to expand the footprint of their capability. So while we've shown the typical technology adoption here as requiring an investment, when you look at an outsourcing transaction, the reality is that the upfront pricing doesn't look any different, or the transition pricing and sort of first-year pricing doesn't look any different than a traditional transaction in most cases. But you do see a significant price reduction, and we'll show on the next slide here some examples that we're seeing. So,
just as we were going through that, we had one of our audience just ask a question, a little more maybe about the comments on the existing tool replacement. Now, obviously, there are new tools potentially that you've talked about that are required for the autonomic implementation. Are you saying that some existing tools may not be therefore required, or how do you see that? Is it one for the other? Do you still need some existing tools? Is one replacing? How do you see that?
Yeah, that great question. Yeah, I think that there will certainly be some initial upfront investment that may not necessarily supplant tools, but over time, as these capabilities grow, we might be looking at integration and replacement of existing capabilities. So certainly some of these tools will interface, so I look at like HP OpenView as an example, system monitoring tool and management tool. As the capabilities and providers build out their solutions, they may be using a different technology or platform. And so clients that have already made investments will need to make a decision about whether they want to, sort of eat the remaining cost of the tools that they do have in favor of a different provider's solution. So I think there'll be a little bit of integration that's going on, and then to the extent that you're moving from one solution to another that uses different technologies, there may also be some lost amortization or depreciation, if you will. So, and great question. So talking a little bit about some of the price impacts that we're seeing in the marketplace, we've got 3 different service towers with 3 different outcomes that we're seeing today, and I'll walk through each of these individually. The first example is in the server tower, where a client has, physical servers, virtualize some of their environment, and now they're looking to employ Autonomics. These are the price declines that we see in a transaction, sort of year on year. And what you don't see is the typical price decline that you would see in a transaction. And what I can tell you is that for all of these services, these are double, if not more, decreases. So, for example, in the server, it's 8 to 13%. We might actually only see 4 to 6% in year 2. And then typically by the time you get to year 3, 4 or 5, instead of 4 to 6%, you're seeing 1 to 2 or maybe 3% reductions in overall price declines. So what that obviously translates to is a TCV over 5-year basis, a pretty significant decline when compared to a more traditional solution, on the order of 20 to 25% for server. And in the case of service desk, you'll see a fairly significant decrease in year 1. And by the time you get out to year 5, that total price is actually about 50% less than a solution without Autonomics. And I mean, that's actually, replacing agents on a service desk as well. So you've got a couple of things at play. Not only is the problem being solved through Autonomics, but potentially even the adoption of Watson-like capabilities, where and we've all experienced it today. When you call a support center, you're oftentimes talking to the computer, and the computer is determining through natural language processing what you're calling about, and then acting on that and coming up with a solution. And many of these today are very crude, but over time we expect that capability will grow, and more and more of the problems will be not only resolved by the system, but you'll be interacting with a computer and getting resolution. So you won't even have a person that you're talking to in most cases, and hopefully we'll all be more satisfied with the outcome that we get. But that still remains to be seen. But a great opportunity in any kind of environment where you've got service agents on the phone, and with the capability of natural language processing, really to be able to resolve that and create a much better outcome, and also reduce the labor component that are included in the services. So we're going to talk now a little bit about some overall market trends and how it relates to the market, and then we'll get into some of the trends that we're actually seeing from a price standpoint, and kind of how these are all coming together and impacting from a price standpoint. So the first trend, obviously, these are just kind of the high level market trends that we're seeing. We've got about 6 or 8 of them. As we've seen in the marketplace, kind of the evolution as we follow outsourcing transactions. We've seen a move in the mix of traditional versus India-based providers winning deals. So many more India-based providers are coming to the table, and they continue to take mind share, if you will, away from the market as they've proven their capabilities. And in fact, many of these providers are the ones that are offering autonomic solutions and end-to-end solutions, which is going to be very interesting as sort of the global economy. Much of the day-to-day lower skill level work has gone offshore. It's a bit ironic that these are the providers that are now driving the next wave of change. Now that they have folks doing the work, actually automating that work and supplanting the labor as a result of that. So it's going to be a very interesting global economy in the next 10 years as that evolution takes place. And that, of course, translates to legacy providers, having margin pressures and threats to their existing models. And then certainly related to that are then renewals. We're seeing a lot more providers or clients going to market to rebid services on a regular basis. And so, a few years back, it was more likely renewal would have occurred. Today, given the price changes and the evolution of services and delivery, we're seeing many more renewals at risk, if you will. And while the incumbent might be a bidder, they're certainly may not be the front runner going into the cycle.
Hey, Chris, another question that sort of relates to some of this around costing. We've been talking a little bit about the pricing reductions that are driven by use of autonomics. There was a question around what about the provider's own cost reductions that are available to them, and I guess how much of that is passed on directly? What do you see in terms of the provider cost versus the market price here?
Yeah, that's a great point. It goes to the third bullet here is that costs are significantly being driven down, which, as you said, directly goes to what does that translate to in terms of price. And right now what we're seeing is providers not passing their initial investment costs onto clients, not showing any savings in year one, and then showing the savings in years 3 through, sort of 2 through 5, if you will. And it is a significant price reduction in those out years, but the question remains, to your point, Howard, is that the cost reduction curve? And likely not. We expect that the cost savings are occurring a lot, or should occur a lot faster in a solution. But if providers are trying to mitigate risk and protect their margins with these solutions, so while they're offering price reductions, they tend to offer them in the outer years, or certainly later than when the cost reductions might occur. So some of these technologies, when they get deployed very rapidly, within a matter of months, are able to produce, savings, cost reductions. But again, those cost reductions aren't being passed on to clients until, year 2 or in the out years of the transaction. And I think that's just a normal process. That normal evolution is that whenever there's a new capability or technology that's being adopted, there's going to be the initial price reduction to create enough interest, but it may not be the ultimate reduction that occurs in the market, and that remaining opportunity will come out as there's much more competition and stability in the market, and you'll see some additional price reductions and more alignment between cost and price in the future. And then the last trend on this slide is just talking a little bit about verticalization, autonomics, and SMAC, which stands for social mobility, analytics, and cloud, and security. These are all the themes now that are present in the transactions that we're doing. So we've seen, just over the last few years, it's no longer about just taking over your environment and doing what you might have been doing or what the prior provider was doing, but really starting to think forward and adopting capabilities and improving security and connecting with the business a lot more. So from a pricing and contract standpoint, we're seeing contract terms now firmly down in the 4-year range. We see some that are in the 3-year range, but definitely reductions in the overall duration of contracts, and then also an increased use of as a service, whether it's infrastructure as a service or any other kinds of software as a service capabilities. We're seeing a disaggregation of the service into different as a service offerings. So we've got security as a service as an example that we're seeing, and moving much more of a multi-sourcing environment or best-of-breed adoption, which obviously requires a lot more service integration and management, as well as governance. And then the other thing, of course, is as these capabilities become common in the marketplace and the risk is lowered, you have much more of the business buying the service rather than the sort of IT acting as a broker, if you will. So that's a very interesting trend that we're seeing in the market, is that IT is becoming less of the, if they need to grow into sort of the IT technology broker rather than the doer or deliverer of services, and that's kind of the balance, because the business is now being able to buy a competitive service, if you will, in the market as a service rather than as a technology solution. And all these changes obviously are making governance become much more of a critical component. So, going beyond vendor management and really being about strategic, looking at dependencies between providers, both internally and externally, and really focused around collaboration and innovation, and ensuring that the services are delivered to a particular service level, but really trying to take it to the next level.
And another sort of question, this came up again from our audience just now, around obviously that there are opportunities here for providers to introduce some price savings, but I guess there's another side to it, which is there's a benefit for the provider, which is to keep that client. Obviously, they're going to make an investment in the knowledge of the client, and the question is around: do you see that that the buyers of those services are then kind of tied into that provider? Does it become harder to switch at that point? How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I touched on it earlier, but absolutely, we believe that this will create some stickiness with customers. I mean, you always run the case of a provider, in the 3 to 5 year horizon doesn't keep up with technology and capability, and that's what we're seeing right now is many providers, implemented a solution 3 or 5 years ago, and what you can buy in the open market is much better. And so I think that's contributing to the fact that people are going to market to really get an understanding of what the market is like today. But the jury's still out. But in the 3 to 5 year horizon, you can imagine that someone that's deployed an autonomic solution that really the vendor understands the client's organization, the systems are processing and continually getting better at resolving problems. I think it's going to be much harder for organizations to make the decision to move unless there are capabilities 3 to 5 years from now that enable deployment of autonomic solutions, that reduce the switching cost, if you will, on these technologies. Because you can imagine it wouldn't make sense to migrate from one provider to the next if you have to go through this 3 or 4 month period while the new system learns your environment, and you have outages and issues and the investment that's required to mitigate that, that remains to be seen. So we think that there will be a little bit more stickiness coming along here. So anyway, on the infrastructure side, we do see Autonomics enabling, as we talked about, preemptive problem management, reducing server costs, and then also remote infrastructure management, which is a very mature offering. And again, the India offshore providers really are the ones that drove that solution, because they didn't have data centers, and they were delivering in remote locations, and so that really has borne fruit and a very common solution in the marketplace. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to see this as we evolve with knowledge management and analytics on the service desk. You know, sort of this shift left, if you will, you know, where you can automate as much of the front end, and then the knowledge workers are sort of at the back end, dealing with the really critical, complex issues, as opposed to, you know, sort of the day-to-day issues. We talked a little bit about cloud and the converged infrastructure, changing the mix of servers. I don't think there's a 3 years ago, we saw a few cloud deals here and there. I don't think there's a transaction we do now that has infrastructure in it where there isn't a physical server, virtual server, cloud, you know, virtual private cloud, and even public solution, all built in and packaged into that solution. So the market is much different, and organizations can then, you know, map their estate, if you will, to whatever technology or capability makes the most sense for their solutions, finding the right price point and service level, if you will. And then obviously improve security offerings, you know, security as a service around monitoring and response. And then the analytics relating to, you know, the Autonomics, understanding where the incident problems are and resolving them. And then, as we talked about, you know, going back to SMAC, the mobility support and really driving mobility as a service, again, which is kind of an example of that verticalization, if you will, where you take a bunch of technologies, component technologies together and create a service where somebody can actually go buy, you know, a completely integrated productivity application, for example, you know, right on through from the app to the device, and then the underlying infrastructure behind that. On the application side, we're hearing about Autonomics driving, you know, productivity improvements in a number of areas inside of the application, really the application support, if you will. And so applying those kind of analytics to these areas, you know, driving benefits similar to infrastructure. We're seeing the adoption of Agile and DevOps becoming much more mainstream. Again, trying to get closer to the you know, integrated solutions. So, you know, with Agile, you know, cross-functional teams in collaborating with analysis, design, development, QA, and then DevOps extending that collaboration to really the operations aspect as well, and then ultimately the customer. So, I'm sorry, Howard, did you say something?
That's okay. No, I was just, we have a couple more questions coming in, but I'm just conscious of time, and we have some more content to go through, so I just want to
give you yeah, and I would just say that, you know, any questions that remain unanswered, I'll certainly, we can get back to folks. If you see any others that are worth sharing for the group, you know, let me know.
Yep.
So yeah, so why don't we'll move a little bit on to business process services, kind of similar. Again, going back to, this is about robotic process automation and verticalization, if you will. So organizations are really buying a solution now rather than buying FTEs, and so going away from sort of business process outsourcing, which is whatever you did, take the FTEs, put them in a shared service center offshore to reduce costs, and now actually looking at making that business process a service and allowing providers to, you know, help offering new augmented services or improved capabilities, delivering it as a service. And that all relates to, you know, as I mentioned earlier, improved governance. So it's not just about tactical day-to-day, but more about the strategy and the deployment of these capabilities, and requiring increased use of service integration management to help manage sort of these multi-sourced environments, and then obviously having demand management and prioritization And again, really trying to focus around collaboration and innovation, end-to-end service levels has become a theme, and then increased management of outcome-based objectives, really trying to focus on the user experience and enabling the business for success, if you will. So that's the sort of the market trends. We're going to talk now, kind of move into the price trends, and talk a little bit about you know, kind of what that means in the market as services evolve. So as we start to look at prices and how they've changed over the market, you have to remember that the service itself is improving. So again, you go think about the car, and the car you bought 10 years ago, you know, the price might be a little bit less or the same, but you're getting a lot more features with that car. So that's happening, if you will. But as we look at just sort of the price points in the market, we can see an evolution and price declines, if you will. And we've got three examples in the upper right-hand corner. What happens is we actually do, we've been doing this for over a decade now, where we're tracking market price trends. What we have found is that the prices, the market move is about double what's actually put into an individual contract. So as an example, if I look at the server prices there, we see prices dropping 3 to 5% a year depending on the solution. Well, when you open up an outsourcing contract, what you see are sort of 2 to 3% reductions year on year. By the time you get to the out years, they're actually 1 or less. And we believe that's due to the risk, you know, sort of financial risk, if you will, of the providers, and forecast risk. So it makes sense when you have these multi-year agreements in place that they would not trend with the market. And obviously what happens over time, if you're not looking at the managing the agreement, doing benchmarking, and then certainly when it makes sense going to market, you know, what happens is just over time, contracts get out of market, and that creates the opportunity for you know, another provider to come in and offer a lower service, a lower price, if you will. But really, you know, it's not uncommon for us to find, you know, transactions that are 2 or 3 years old, and they're already, you know, 10 to 15% out of market. So it's a sort of normal part of the market that the market evolves, and prices decline. And once you're in a transaction, you're sort of suspended it with that solution and pricing structure that lived, you know, 2 or 3 years ago. And so that's why we're seeing shorter durations in contracts, and new services that don't require as much transition or transformation to be adopted. So then the next slide is just showing kind of the typical price declines we're seeing on a contract on a tower by tower basis. Just to give some examples, we don't have to go through all of these, but desktop and service desk, we're actually seeing a move from, and this is that shift left thing we're talking about. We've got more and more what used to be done, you know, sort of with dedicated resources on site on a client location for desktop support or desk side support being done in the service desk, and an increase in the complexity of the services that are being generated. So you've got a decline in desktop pricing and an increase in a total price in service desk, with you know, bring your own device, you know, more complex problems, if you will. And we believe that is at the heart of the change that we're going to see with service desk pricing in the future. Again, starting to either be flat or declining over time. The other one, I guess, that I would just want to point out is the application rates sort of flat to decreasing. And again, that's just the labor rates that are going into the service component. And again, we're seeing adoption of technology and capability to help improve productivity, and providers and clients wanting to move much more to an outcome-based solution. So we're expecting to see that occur in the marketplace. And for the rest of the services, they're sort of the traditional price declines. We see certainly SAN and telecom as being fairly significant declines in pricing, because those are much more commodity solutions, and then similarly server reductions. So that kind of concludes the content portion of the webinar. I know we've got a few more minutes, Howard. We might be able to take a few more questions at the end here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. In fact, there was we had quite a few questions come in, so I'll just sort of pick one or two of them out. There was one which I guess was on the theme of the sourcing side of this, where we've been talking about the service providers having the capability to invest and exploit these tools to help clients. I guess there's a point where the client themselves could decide to invest in that skill set, whether they use a provider initially to take on that work and then maybe bring the work back in-house, or do it themselves from the beginning. Do you see a trend that you think is going to happen there, whether clients will use providers to take off that workload and the kind of the creation of the process analysis, and then maybe bring it back in-house, or do you think they'll just kind of carry on using their providers the whole time?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think one of the trends we're seeing to kind of again differentiate between the adoption of automation between IT infrastructure with Autonomics and then also robotic process automation. The robotic process automation with the business processes, I think, is much more likely to evolve into I don't want to call it a make or buy decision, but I think that will be something where at least our sense is that many more organizations will consider adopting, bringing in a robotic process automation tool and implementing their own reduction, because in many cases we've got shared services centers that are captive and they're offshore. So the delivery model for BPO, if you will, is much more likely to be in a shared services center where the client is running a captive, and they can employ the technology and create the opportunity. Whereas on the IT infrastructure with Autonomics, it seems to be much more of the providers bringing the solution to the table as part of their solution. So they've made the investment in the capability and their infrastructure to be able to do that. And it seems as though fewer organizations will adopt Autonomics on their own, but rather sort of buy that service, whether it's a managed server or managed gigabyte of storage or what have you, that they'll buy that service from a technology provider who will implement more of of the automation. So I think that's the trend. I think it's much more likely that on the robotic process automation side, we'll see companies doing that, making those kinds of investments, if you will.
Very good. I mean, I think we've covered sort of most of the themes of the questions that we have. I guess that sort of a wrapping up question or comment, Chris, is obviously this is still relatively new, maybe newer in the ITO side than on BPO, where we've seen this in place for some time. How do you think this is likely to evolve in the next 12 months? I mean, obviously we're seeing prices change pretty quickly, but these are kind of step changes in the market that we're seeing coming to clients, and obviously competition will have a driving effect there, just because the providers more and more will have to have offerings and capabilities here that can allow them to compete for. It's kind of like what remote infrastructure management was 10, 15 years ago. You kind of have to do that, have to be able to have a labor arbitrage play in that case. Are you seeing that these trends look fairly robust? Are you thinking they'll kind of evolve over time? What's your kind of sense for that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. What I think we're seeing right now is, as I mentioned earlier, the pilot, vendors and clients doing these pilot projects, creating proofs of concept, and starting to see the success of these initial transactions, And so not every deal is going to see a 30% reduction in their solution. So the market, when you look at the market itself, there's going to be leaders and laggards. And so I would imagine in a couple of years, as the market penetration grows, that's when I expect to see, sort of the significant price declines when there's a majority of the market moving in that direction. You've got providers, multiple providers that have very robust solutions, and then you have clients that recognize that they can buy that solution. And it's not unlike what we saw with the cloud marketplace, the sort of infrastructure as a service. You go back 5 years ago, and hardly anyone was using any cloud technology or capability. If they were, it was for point solutions, disaster recovery, not very common use. And today now it is much more prevalent because it's sort of a proven capability, lots of providers and capabilities, fairly well-known market prices, and so it really that's when it takes off. And I think we're going to see that similar evolution, probably really hitting the forefront in the next I would say 6 to 12 months, and then for the next couple of years thereafter. I think it's really going to kick in, and that's when we're going to see a real sea change in the marketplace.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Chris. I think we are just about out of time, so appreciate your insights as always. Obviously, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to ask them now or to reach out, and we will try to handle those after the session. But other than that, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining and pass you back to Brady for a few closing comments.
Okay, and thank you everybody for joining. This session has been recorded, so you can expect an email to come through probably tomorrow morning that will have a link to both the slides that were presented here today by Chris and Howard, as well as a recording of the presentation. So I hope you guys all have a great morning. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you next time.